Okay. So I apologize if my voice goes in and out. I've been sick for like the last week. I have some of my notes kind of scattered around here. But so the first thing that I want to talk about is how I kind of want to compare to the last couple videos we've watched. The last ones have been documentaries, and this one was set up more like a movie. I think I think both are great. The documentaries kind of play a little bit more on your emotional strings, I guess, because you get to hear from the person themselves, and um, it's more of like a tragedy, and you get to see the emotion in their face and in their voices, and you get to hear, like I said, the story directly from them. But for the movie side, it kind of plays a little bit more to my generation. Because sometimes, watching documentaries can just seem like we're getting thrown all this information. But whenever I watch a movie, I can kind of put myself in that position, and feel like I'm living their life and see kind of how it evolved from start to finish. I did a little bit of research about some of the characters, and I saw that a couple of them were fictional, but I also think that that was a really good touch, the ones that they put in there for the movie. Um, Patrick Dempsey being one of them. First of all, he's just a great actor in general, so I think it was good to throw him in there as, Alice's kind of fling love interest. Just kind of, I think, to kind of pull you into the movie a little bit more, see the storyline. I don't necessarily think his role was as important as some of the others, obviously, and obviously he was fictional. But from a movie perspective, I think that was a really good tactic to kind of throw that storyline in there. And then, of course, the Laytons. I thought that Emily Layton and the senator, that was a really cool perspective that I'm going to talk about in just a little bit. I want to read on page 55. It talks about framing and frame alignment. It says, for people to be attracted, to join, and to remain committed to a movement, its issues must be presented or framed so that they fit or resonate with the beliefs, feelings, and desires of potential recruits. Um, and I think that that was Alice. She was kind of the backbone. She was the picture perfect frame for the movement, the women's suffrage movement. She was a good, strong face to put forward, even whenever everyone else was getting thrown into the prison jail camp and getting arrested. Um, she was like, "Put me on the list, put me on the list," and the girl was like, "No, we're not putting you on the list because we need you here fighting from the outside." And I think that shows how important her role was. She was the leader, she was the brains behind everything, and even when she did get arrested, she was still able to hold that leadership role and make the same impact on the inside as she was the outside. If anything, she made a greater impact. Um, I don't know if it said it in the movie or not, but whenever I was reading about it, it said that what they were feeding her through the tube was raw eggs and milk, and that's just disgusting, and I don't know how that was gonna help her health. But the fact that she was going on a hunger strike and refusing to eat, and um, going to those extreme lengths show her drive and how motivated she was for this cause. And them force feeding her with their tube also shows that the government was maybe trying to cover up or downplay what was going on, because they can't have her, die in the prison, or they can't have her coming out malnourished or something, because they don't, in the end, they don't want to make themselves look bad, even if they are the ones that are looking bad. Um, so I also think that the time frame was the perfect time for them to initiate this movement, because Wilson was so big on democracy. And one of the quotes from the movie, basically, whenever Alice was like, "How can you argue for the decisions that you're making when every citizen can't even vote?" And it's kind of like she took his words, twisted them, and then threw him right back in his face. Um, and then we even saw whenever they were going, talking to all the different political leaders. I'm not exactly sure which ones, what they were, but there was one from South Carolina, and he was like, "Women don't need to vote. Us as men, we can take care of them, so they don't need to. you guys don't need to vote. We've got you. But clearly that wasn't the case because we watched them in the parade get completely bombarded. And this is where I want to bring back in Emily Layton to the story because her husband, as a U.S. senator, Democratic, who was against all of this, and then you have his wife who's, you know, joining the movement and paying her dues, and he finds out and he's like, no, you know, I'm going to cut off all your bank accounts and all your money, and you can't. Well, I'll just pay all the bills from my account. Your account's done. So it's kind of like, yeah, we can take care of women, but as soon as they as soon as women start to have an opinion or think that they can do something, the men just kind of shut them out. And maybe the men actually think that they know what's best or that's what they're doing. I don't know. I mean, I know there were some fictional parts of this movie, but, you know, for Tom, I think his name was Tom Layton, he kind of just, I really think that he thought he was making the right decision for her. Um, but obviously, you know, that's not even the case. And I think it's important whenever she said that, you know, in or out of prison, women still aren't free. So, you know, even whenever she, she was, you know, fighting with him about what he was fighting for, he's just like, well, can you afford a lawyer, you know, and or I'm going to take your kids. It's all going to be mine. She's like, you know, what do you get from that? So I think it was cool to see their perspective. Two people who are married who with completely opposite views. Um, and then, just a side note, my favorite quote from this entire movie was whenever the doctor was examining Alice's mental health and reporting back on her state. He basically said, courage is often mistaken for insanity when it comes to women. And that's just kind of really funny because it's so true. And it shows how the movie really shows how passionate these women were for this cause, and the great lengths that they were going and willing to go to in order to win this battle and fight this battle. I mean, they stood their ground, and I think it's interesting to relate this kind of to now, and then also some of the other videos we watched this time, and then in the Freedom Riders, we really saw how in order to argue and stand up for themselves and fight for a movement, it has all been nonviolent and it has all been very just like respectful, I guess, that we don't see in today's society. It kind of seems like today it's all throwing out, um, you know, curse words and yelling and screaming and burning things down and, you know, throwing a huge fit. Whereas, and it's a little bit harder to get the movement across and get across what you're fighting for because how can you be fighting for something and you're basically doing everything that you're fighting against in a way. So I think it's interesting to see how they did it back then, and how successful they were. And I also think it was smart of them to go for one movement, or go for one change, you know, the right to vote and stuff like just one specific thing, because I think nowadays we start to incorporate way too many things into one, and you know, some people agree with one thing and others don't agree, and you kind of start to mesh, and then you kind of lose the purpose of what you're fighting for. So I think them going with one specific thing was very important. I also, it talked a lot about how the news was reporting um, every day and covering it. I think that also shows the importance, um, because if it was making the New York Times every single day, obviously there was some level of need for it or importance to show this movement. So someone, at least at the time prior, was recognizing that this was going to be something big. I also just have one other thing from our book. It's chapter 11, The Sustaining Commitment Among Radical Feminists, page 115 and 116. It talks a little bit about how the feminist theory analyzes the source and operation of patriarchy and male dominance, women economic and social oppression, violence against women, and the links between sexism and racism and classism. And basically, it shows how, in order to understand the feminist theory, in order to understand what they were going through, they didn't just look at what they want and what they were fighting for. They looked at the things like the violence against them and male dominance. So they had to really be able to grasp a little bit of everything in order to fight for what they were trying to accomplish. It's kind of long. I know it was only supposed to be 5 minutes, but I really did enjoy this movie, and I thought it was very interesting. And there were a lot of little things in there that kind of stood out to me, and it was just really enjoyable. And there was a lot to uh, just kind of interesting to relate it to how it is now, because I know that the feminist movement is still very, very relevant today, and it's just very different. So it's cool to see how they did it back then, and maybe one day we can kind of incorporate that into the now.